In course of time, already by 800 BCE, the original Vedic knowledge was largely lost. The outer forms of yajna, which grew in complexity of symbols and rituals, veiled the deeper spiritual knowledge. We can see that Yaska, the ancient lexicographer who lived before Panini, counts more than 400 antique words of which he did not know the meaning. This loss of Vedic knowledge led to a powerful movement of revival in the form of the Brahmanas and the Upanishads. The Brahmanas focused on conservation of the forms of Vedic yajna. They labored to fix and preserve every detail of the Vedic ceremony. The conditions of their material effectuality and purpose of their different parts and movements. On the other hand, the Upanishad sought the revelation of the soul of Veda. They sought to recover the lost or waning knowledge by meditation and spiritual experience. They were seekers of a higher than verbal truth, and used words merely as suggestions for the illumination towards which they were striving. The Vedic word was a seed of thought and vision by which they recovered old truths in new forms. What they found, they expressed in other terms, more intelligible to the age in which they lived. Thus, the eternal knowledge enshrined in the Vedas was brought forth and restated as the knowledge of Brahman, the central idea of the Upanishads. Their real work was to found Vedanta rather than to interpret the Veda. The word Vedanta is nowadays often used as if it meant the end of Veda. But it means the culmination of the rediscovery of Vedic experience and giving them a new form in a more modern language based on the inner realizations of great rishis like Yajnavalkya and Janaka. While a large number of Upanishads emerged over many centuries, the 10 most ancient Upanishads are considered as the primary source. These primary Upanishads themselves have always been known as the original Vedanta. They are at once the flowering and ending of the great age of intuition in India. The Vedantic seers bridged the ancient mystic tradition of the Vedas with the coming age of reason in India. The immense work done in this period became the firm bedrock and perennial source of inspiration for Indian spirituality. It formed the young soul of Indian culture with a profound spiritual turn that would continuously unfold her mission for the next 2500 years.
Shanti, Shanti.
After the age of intuition and its profound heights of spiritual realization, consciousness was on a descending course of evolution. In this downward movement, a reasoning intelligence emerged around 500 BCE onwards. In India, as well in Greece and China, the faculty of reason, logic and philosophical methods were replacing the mystical and intuitive methods of the previous cycles. But in India, unlike other cultures, this effort was never dissociated from the spiritual motive of the previous cycles due to the great work done by the Upanishadic seers. It was a birth time and youth of the seeking intellect, and, as in Greece, philosophy was the main instrument by which it labored to solve the problems of life and the world. Science too developed, but it came second, only as an auxiliary power. The ancient mantric language, which Sri Aurobindo referred to as Deva Bhasha, had already fragmented into many vernaculars. Grammarians like Panini tried to purify and reconstruct the ancient language. This purified and reconstructed form was called Sanskrit. Everything else became known as Prakrit. The algorithmic and generative grammar of Sanskrit provided a solid foundation for developing the linguistic precision required for philosophical inquiry. With it came the sutra literature, concise and precise logical expressions that were of scientific nature, unlike the Vedas and the Upanishads. The original intuitive and integral process and knowledge of the Upanishads, fragmented into 6 major schools of philosophy and epistemology. The fundamental perception, separating, narrowed itself and became the Uttara Mimamsa of Badrayana. The discriminative analysis, separating, narrowed itself and became Sankhya of Kapila. The psychological experimentation, separating, narrowed itself and became Yoga of Patanjali. The physical analysis, separating, narrowed itself and became Vaisheshika of Kannada. The analysis of discriminative processes, separating, narrowed itself and became Nyaya of Gautama. The application in formulas of life action, separating, narrowed itself extremely and became the Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini. Each of the 6 systems arrogated to themselves the status of complete knowledge. Besides them, 2 major religions were born, Buddhism and Jainism. Systems of knowledge and worldviews differentiated themselves in terms of Vedic and non-Vedic. On a political level, this period saw the attempt of Alexander from Macedonia to invade India. In response to this new threat, With the statesmanship of Chanakya and Chandragupta, the Mauryan Empire rose up, encompassing most of India. The successive empires that followed protected India from invasions for another 1,000 years. Emperor Ashoka of Mauryan dynasty chose Buddhism to be his path and made it his mission to spread the cultural influence of Indian civilization across Southeast and Northwest Asia. Meanwhile, the notions of dharma and shastra dominated political and social discourse. Two national epics, Ramayana of Valmiki and Mahabharata of Vyasa, took birth, covering the entire geographic area of India in its narrative. Both the epics based their stories on ancient legendary kings and their role in establishing dharma in the society. The Gita of Mahabharata brought in a whole new synthesis out of the fragmented systems of knowledge. The spiritual wisdom of the Vedas and Upanishads were given a new form accessible to the common man. These two epics were destined to shape the entire civilization for the coming 2 millennia. They deeply imprinted the ideal of spiritual purpose and self-realization in the social life of Indian people. It was a time of massive social construction, not only in terms of large empires, but also of philosophies, religions, epics, cosmology, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and social sciences with detailed systematization and codification. They laid solid intellectual foundations for a deep and rich spiritual culture. They powerfully directed the collective mind of Indian civilization towards her spiritual mission. This was the time when the soul of India reached her deep maturity and wide creative capacity. After the divine childhood of the Vedic period, after the heroic youth of the Upanishadic seers who rediscovered the Vedic experience, after the bright and strong early manhood of the age of reason, the center of consciousness of the Indian civilization shifted further down to the heart. The power of rational intelligence, having matured through the previous centuries, stepped back and gave full play to the emotions and aesthetic sense. This shift found its matured and refined expressions during the Gupta Empire, bringing forth the golden age of the Indian civilization. It was one of the most opulent and creative periods in Indian history. As part of the ongoing development of reason, the Gupta period saw the birth and growth of Nalanda, the world's first residential university. During its peak, Nalanda housed 2,000 teachers and 10,000 students. They flocked to Nalanda from all over India and the neighboring Asian countries. However, admission to Nalanda was tough, and only the intellectual elite could get through. The wider population, outside the universities and monasteries, were awaiting their spiritual education. As the center of consciousness had already shifted to the heart, the emotional and aesthetic needs of the civilization needed to come into focus. The already well-developed rational intelligence provided a firm foundation for all forms of arts, music, and literature to flourish. The representative poet of the era was Kalidasa, a Sanskrit dramatist and poet. His Sanskrit play Shakuntala can be considered as the most perfect and captivating romantic drama in all literature. It was time for the collective emotions of the Indian civilization to be refined and turned towards divine realization. This was accomplished through a new form of religious poetry known as Puranas and temple worship. The name Purana means from ancient times. During the development of the age of reason, the Gita had already brought forth the powerful role of love and devotion in spiritual realization. While Vyasa is said to be the initiator of the Puranas, it is during the Gupta period that Puranic poetry came to the forefront and developed. The seed of devotion sprouted and flourished in the form of 18 major Puranas over the coming centuries. They used the emotional being as the means of spiritual transformation and spiritualized the emotional level in humankind. Storytelling based on the Puranas, Ramayana and Mahabharata became the perfect means for the spiritual education of the wider population of all classes. This period saw a powerful revival of the Vedic culture. The Puranas retained the essential truths of the Vedas, but created new forms of expression. The Vedic pantheon of nature gods was replaced by the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva and their female consorts. The Vedic house of fire and sacrifice was replaced by temples and deity worship. This period saw the birth and growth of beautiful and ornate temple architecture in India. They appealed to the emotions of the heart and aesthetic delight expressed through sacred sculptures and designs. The deity worship, rituals and ceremonies infused the spiritual ideals into the mass consciousness. The presence of the divine seated in the heart of humanity became a popular understanding. Devotion became a popular method for spiritual realization. It is during this period the story of the 10 avatars of Vishnu came into prominence. The sequence of avatars provided an easy framework for the masses to comprehend the notion of spiritual evolution and the manifestation of the divine in humanity. Buddha was also integrated into the list of avatars. The ancient Vedic and Upanishadic cosmology found a new expression in the form of the 7 worlds of Puranic cosmology. This set the foundation for the emergence and growth of Bhakti movement in India, orienting the whole civilization and its emotions towards spiritual realization. This evolutionary movement continued to flourish through many saints across India over the next millennia. The perfect outcome of this evolution can be found in the philosophy and religion of divine love promulgated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Alegrémonos, porque la locura que estamos viviendo es una ilusión que está obligando a más y más personas a despertar. Sin embargo, debemos tener compasión por aquellos que son incapaces de despertar, porque las inyecciones de ARNM han creado una separación del alma individual. La única manera de salir de la ilusión es mediante el incumplimiento absoluto. Los valientes han elegido conscientemente salir de la ilusión y continuarán su evolución de conciencia en la espiral ascendente de cristal. Sé que mi experiencia en la cárcel fue una bendición porque me obligó a dejar Canadá y lo que se percibía como una vida perfecta de una dentista muy exitosa y madre de 2 hijos maravillosos. Accedí al coraje que había dentro de mí, me abandoné a mi alma y salté a lo completamente desconocido. Hoy puedo ofrecer orientación a quienes eligen la vida en Colombia o Ecuador. Una estadía prolongada en Cascada Café Retiro cuesta $120 por semana. Durante tu estancia, expande tu conciencia con un taller de 2 días de conciencia, amor infinito. ¿Quién soy yo y qué demonios he venido a hacer en esta tierra? Realizarme. Aprende sobre la milagrosa nuez de Sacha Inchi. Esta planta oleaginosa tiene el mayor contenido de proteínas con todos los aminoácidos y ácidos grasos esenciales para el máximo bienestar de la salud humana. Finalmente, ofrezco odontología reconstructiva a un precio muy económico. Me guían las enseñanzas de Sri Aurobindo y la Madre. Desde el 29 de febrero de 1956, la supermente ha estado operativa en la Tierra como un poder evolutivo activo. Una nueva fase de evolución ha comenzado en medio del colapso del viejo mundo. La conciencia, amor infinito, es una invitación a participar en una aventura de conciencia sin precedentes. ¿Te unirás a nosotros? Amor infinito.